I've been a butcher for 22 years. I took over the shop from my father when he got too old to lift the half carcasses off the hooks, and he took it over from his father before that. Gross Family Meats. Same sign out front since 1974. Same tile floors. Same walk-in cooler that hums too loud and frosts over in the corners, no matter how many times you scrape it down. The shop is on Meisenweg, wedged between a dry cleaner and a place that sells used furniture nobody wants. Not exactly prime real estate. For most of my career, the shop did fine. Not great. Fine. Enough to keep the lights on and put food on the table and not much else. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what comes after. The shop was never thriving. It was surviving. And I was tired. You spend 2 decades standing on concrete floors in a cold room, breaking down pigs and cattle, trimming fat, grinding mince, wrapping cuts in brown paper for people who haggle over 50 cents. It wears on you. Not in some dramatic way. Just a slow grinding down, like a blade that never gets sharpened. You wake up one morning and you're 46 years old, and your knees ache and your hands are stiff, and you can't remember the last time you felt anything about the work other than obligation. That's where I was when it started. The first time I found the meat, it was a Tuesday. I came in around 5 in the morning like I always do, unlocked the front, turned on the lights, walked back to the cooler to check on what I had hanging. And there on the middle shelf, sitting on a steel tray I didn't recognize, were 4 cuts of meat I had never seen before. They weren't labeled. No supplier sticker, no weight tag, no date stamp. Just 4 portions, maybe 300 grams each, sitting on that tray like someone had placed them there carefully. The color was wrong for pork, too dark for chicken, not quite right for beef either. Somewhere in between, a deep reddish pink that caught the cooler light in a way that made you look twice. The marbling was what got me. I've handled thousands of cuts over the years, and I know what good marbling looks like. This was different. The fat was threaded through the muscle in these fine, almost delicate lines, evenly distributed in a way I'd never seen in any animal I'd ever broken down. It looked like something from a textbook illustration of what perfect meat should be. Except no real meat looks like that. I picked up one of the cuts. It was cold and firm, the way properly chilled meat should be. The texture under my fingers felt right. It smelled right. That clean, slightly metallic smell of fresh-cut raw meat. But I couldn't place the animal. Not beef, not pork, not lamb, not venison. I've processed game, rabbit, wild boar, pheasant. It wasn't any of those either. I stood there in the cooler holding this cut of meat and I thought, did I order something and forget? Did a supplier drop off a sample? The back door was locked from inside, same as always. No sign of anyone coming in. I should have thrown it out. That's what any reasonable person would do with unidentified meat that appeared in their cooler overnight. That's what the health inspector would tell you to do. That's what I would tell anyone who asked me. I didn't throw it out. I don't have a good reason for that. I can tell you what I told myself at the time, which is that the meat looked fine, it smelled fine, and throwing away good product felt wrong when margins were as tight as they were. But that's just the surface excuse. Underneath it, there was something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or something worse than curiosity. I trimmed one of the cuts into thin slices and pan-fried a piece in the back kitchen where I sometimes heat up my lunch. Just salt, a little oil, high heat for about a minute each side. When it hit the pan, the smell that came off it was unlike anything I'd cooked before. Rich and clean and deep, like the best beef you've ever had, but sweeter, with an almost nutty quality to it. The fat rendered down into the pan and turned golden. I ate the piece standing at the counter. I ate it fast, the way you eat when something is so good you don't want to slow down enough to think about it. When I finished, I stood there with the empty pan in my greasy fingers, and I thought, I can sell this. I know how that sounds. I put the remaining cuts in the display case that morning with a handwritten label that said, House Special, Limited. I priced it high because I didn't have much of it, and because pricing things high makes people think they're getting something worth paying for. Mrs. Brenner was my first customer, same as every Tuesday. She's been coming to the shop since my father ran it. She looked at the display case, pointed at the new cuts, and said, "What's that then?" "Something new I'm trying," I told her. "From a specialty supplier. Very limited." She bought 2 portions, came back the next day, a Wednesday, when she never comes in, and bought 4 more. Said she'd made it for her husband, and he'd asked her where she'd been hiding this butcher all these years. She laughed when she told me that. I laughed too. By Thursday, I'd sold out. All 4 of the original cuts, gone. People were asking for more. Dieter, who runs the furniture shop next door, came over specifically to tell me his wife had made him come ask when I'd have more of that special meat in stock. I told them all soon. I didn't know if that was true. Friday morning there was more. Same tray, same shelf, same unlabeled cuts, sitting there like they'd materialized out of the cold air itself. 6 portions this time, slightly different cuts. Some thicker, some thinner. One that looked like it might have come from a different part of whatever animal this was. The marbling was consistent across all of them. That same impossible, even threading of fat through lean. I sold out by noon. The next Monday, there were 8 portions, then 10. The quantities kept growing, like whatever was supplying this meat knew exactly how much demand there was, and adjusted accordingly. I want to be honest here. I want to say I was losing sleep over it, that I was racked with guilt or fear or confusion. But I wasn't. The shop was making money. Real money, for the first time in years. People were driving in from other neighborhoods. I heard from a regular that someone had posted about the shop in one of those local food groups online. There was a line on Saturday morning. A line at Gross Family Meats. That hadn't happened since my grandfather was alive. I told myself a lot of things during those first few weeks. That a supplier must have made a deal with my father before he died, and I'd forgotten about it. That someone was doing me a favor. That there was some reasonable, boring explanation I just hadn't figured out yet. I told myself these things, and then I stopped thinking about it and went back to cutting and weighing and wrapping and taking money. The truth is, I didn't want to know. The shop was doing well, and I didn't want to know. It was about 3 weeks in when I started waking up tired. Not regular tired. I'm always regular tired. That's just what this job does to your body. This was different. I'd go to bed at 10, sleep straight through, wake up at 4:30 when my alarm went off, and feel like I hadn't slept at all. My muscles ached in ways I couldn't explain. My shoulders, my forearms, my lower back. The specific muscles you use when you're working a carcass on the block. the cutting muscles. One morning I woke up and there was a bruise on my shin I didn't remember getting. Another morning there was a small cut on my left index finger, the kind you get from a boning knife when your grip slips. It had already scabbed over. I hadn't used a boning knife the day before. I found sawdust in my hair one night when I was getting ready for bed. Fine bone dust, the kind the bandsaw kicks up when you're cutting through hard material. I'd showered after work. I always shower after work. Then I found the shoes. My work boots, which I always leave by the back door of the shop, were by my bed one morning. I live above the shop, just a small flat on the second floor, nothing special. The stairs from my flat led down to the back hallway of the shop. I always take my boots off at the bottom of the stairs and leave them by the shop's back door. But here they were, next to my bed, and they were dirty. Not with the usual stuff. Not blood or fat or the grime from the shop floor. There was mud on them. Reddish-brown mud. The kind you get from the clay soil out past the edge of town. That was when I set up the camera. I used my phone. I didn't want to buy a proper security camera, because that would mean admitting to myself that something was actually wrong, that this wasn't just stress or bad sleep or forgetting things. A phone was casual. A phone was just making sure. I propped it on my dresser, angled toward my bed, plugged it in, and set it to record overnight. The first night, nothing. I slept straight through. Didn't move much. Normal. The second night, nothing again. I almost stopped after that. Told myself I was being stupid. The third night, I watched the footage the next morning, sitting on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hands. For the first 3 hours, nothing. Just me lying in bed, breathing. The occasional shift in position. Then, around 3 a.m, I sat up. It wasn't the way you normally sit up in bed. It was smooth, too smooth, like a mechanism engaging. 1 second I was lying flat on my back. The next I was upright, legs swinging over the side of the bed. My eyes were open, but even on the phone's camera, in the low light, I could tell they were wrong. Not focused on anything. Just open. I watched myself stand up, walk to the dresser, and put on pants and a shirt. My movements were deliberate but strange, slightly off in a way that's hard to describe. Like someone who knew how a body was supposed to move, but was working from instructions rather than instinct. I watched myself walk out of the bedroom. The camera didn't cover the hallway or the stairs, so for about 40 minutes, there was just an empty room. Then I heard sounds. Faint, because the phone's microphone wasn't great, but unmistakable once I knew what I was listening for. The band saw. The wet, grinding whine of the band saw cutting through something dense. It would run for a while, then stop, then start again, over and over. Sometimes there were long pauses, 5-10 minutes of nothing, and then the saw again. I could hear other sounds too, in the gaps, scraping, chopping, the heavy thud of something being shifted on the cutting block. This went on for almost 3 hours. 3 hours of cutting. The footage showed me walking back into the bedroom just before 5 a.m, taking off my clothes and getting back into bed. My hands and forearms were dark with something I couldn't quite make out on the phone's camera. I lay down, closed my eyes, and within minutes my alarm went off, and I watched myself wake up. normally this time, groggy and slow, the way I always wake up. I turned off the video. I sat there for a while. Then I went downstairs. The cooler had 14 fresh cuts on the tray, more than ever before. They were beautiful, perfectly portioned, that same deep reddish pink with the fine marbling. The cutting block had been cleaned, but not well. There were traces in the grain of the wood, pinkish smears that hadn't been scrubbed out fully. The bandsaw blade was warm. I looked at the floor near the back door and saw faint tracks, boot prints in something dark, leading from the door to the cutting area and back. And there was something else I noticed, something that stuck in my mind in a way I can't shake. The drain in the floor, the one I used to wash down the cutting area at the end of each day. It was stained around the edges, not with the usual runoff from beef or pork processing. This was darker, thinner. It had seeped into the grout lines around the drain in a way that regular animal blood doesn't do. Regular animal blood clots and thickens, and you can scrub it up. This had spread like water. I cleaned it up. I put the 14 cuts in the display case. I opened the shop. I should tell you about the van. I've had the same van for 11 years. White panel van, nothing special. I use it to pick up stock from the wholesaler twice a week and occasionally to make deliveries to restaurants that order in bulk. It's usually parked behind the shop in the small lot that backs up to the alley. After I watched the footage, I went out to the van. I don't know what I expected to find. I think part of me was hoping it would be clean, empty, normal, that the sleepwalking was just in the shop, that I was just rearranging stock in my sleep or something I could explain away. The van was not clean. The back was a mess. The floor mat, which is just a rubber sheet I throw in to protect the bed, was wrinkled and bunched up like something heavy had been dragged across it. There were smears on the inside walls, dark, dried, flaking off in places, and in the middle of the van's bed, shoved toward the front behind the driver's partition, there was a tarp. It was a blue tarp, the kind you can buy at any hardware store. It was folded over on itself several times, wrapped around something. The shape underneath was lumpy, uneven. Part of it was flat and wide. Part of it was long and narrow. The tarp was stained through in several places. Dark brown, almost black. The color blood turns when it's been sitting for a while. I stood at the open back doors of the van, and I looked at that tarp for a long time. The morning was cold, and my breath was coming out in little clouds, and I could hear traffic on the main road, and someone's dog barking a few streets over. Normal sounds. The world going about its business. And here I was, standing behind my butcher shop, looking at a tarp in my van that I knew I should open and knew I was not going to open. Because if I opened it, I would know. And if I knew, I would have to do something about it. And if I did something about it, the shop would go back to the way it was before. The line on Saturday mornings would disappear. The money would stop. The feeling of walking into a shop that was actually succeeding after 22 years of just getting by would end. I closed the van doors. I went back inside. I sold out by 2 o'clock that afternoon. Let me tell you what I noticed about the cuts, because a butcher notices things other people don't. Over those first few weeks, I was handling this meat every day, and certain details accumulated in my mind whether I wanted them to or not. The cuts had no bone. Not a single portion ever came with bone attached. Whatever I was doing down there at 3 in the morning, I was deboning everything completely. That's not easy. Deboning is skilled work. It takes time and precision, and doing it in your sleep seems impossible. Except apparently it wasn't. The band saw was being used for the initial breakdown, the heavy work of getting through whatever needed to be gotten through before the real butchering could start. That's why it took so long. I could hear on the recording that the saw would struggle sometimes. Long, straining runs where the pitch of the blade would drop because it was working through something resistant. Dense material. The kind of thing that takes patience and pressure. After the saw work, the finer cuts were done by hand. I know this because I examined the edges of the meat closely one morning, and the knife work was precise. Clean cuts, smooth surfaces, no tearing or ragging. Whoever was doing this, and I have to say whoever, because even though I know it was my body doing the work, it didn't feel like me, knew their way around a blade. They were cutting along the muscle fibers in a way that maximized the quality of each portion. Professional work. Better than what I do when I'm awake, if I'm being honest. The muscle itself had a grain to it that was finer than what you see in most commercial meat. The fibers were thinner, more tightly packed. And the fat, that beautiful marbling, wasn't distributed the way it is in any livestock animal I've ever worked with. In cattle, marbling follows certain patterns based on the muscle group. In pork, it's different. Less marbling overall, more of a fat cap. This meat had marbling everywhere, uniform, like the fat had been laid down slowly over a long period in a body that moved regularly but not strenuously. Not a farm animal, not something that stood in a field or a pen, something that walked around, something that used its muscles in varied, complex ways. I noticed other things. The color of the fat was white, not yellow like grass-fed beef, not the pinkish white of pork fat, clean white. And when I rendered it down, it had a low melting point, lower than tallow or lard. It liquefied fast and clean and tasted almost sweet. I don't know when exactly I understood what it was. There wasn't a single moment where it clicked. It was more like a slow accumulation of evidence that I kept pushing to the edges of my consciousness, refusing to let it come together into a complete picture. Every individual detail could be explained away. The color could be a breed I wasn't familiar with. The texture could be some exotic variety. The lack of bone could mean I was just thorough in my sleep. Each piece, on its own, was manageable. But all of them together, they told a story I didn't want to read. The shop kept getting busier. I hired Lena, a girl from the neighborhood, to help behind the counter because I couldn't handle the volume alone. She was 19, eager, didn't ask many questions. She'd weigh the cuts, wrap them in paper, make small talk with the customers. She called the mystery meat the good stuff, because that's what the customers called it. "Do you have any of the good stuff today?" they'd ask. Like it was a secret. Like they were in on something. They weren't in on anything. They were just people who liked the way something tasted. That's all it ever is with food. Does it taste good? Is it affordable? Can I get more? Nobody asks where their chicken comes from when they buy it at the supermarket. Nobody wants to see the killing floor. People want the clean, wrapped product and the story they tell themselves about it. And nothing else. I told them it was from a specialty farm. Small operation, heritage breed, limited supply. They nodded and accepted this without question. Why wouldn't they? I was a third-generation butcher. I had credibility. I had my grandfather's name on the sign. People trusted me. Mrs. Brenner started bringing friends. Then those friends brought their friends. Someone wrote about the shop in the local newspaper. Just a small piece in the weekend section. A paragraph about a local butcher shop experiencing a renaissance. A restaurant on the other side of town called and asked if I could supply them. I said yes. The quantities in the cooler kept growing to meet demand. Every morning, more cuts on the tray. I stopped watching the camera footage after that first time. I couldn't watch it again, but I could hear it sometimes. Lying in bed in that thin space between asleep and awake, I'd hear the band saw running below me, and I'd feel my body trying to get up. Feel that pull in my muscles like something was calling me downstairs. And then I'd be gone. And the next thing I'd know, my alarm would be going off, and I'd be back in bed, and my forearms would be sore, and there'd be the fine pink grit of bone dust under my fingernails. The van. I should talk about the van again. I started noticing mileage. Not much. 10, 15 kilometers overnight. Enough to get somewhere and come back. The fuel gauge would be slightly lower in the morning than it had been the night before. Once I found a receipt on the passenger seat from a petrol station I've never been to, time stamped at 1 in the morning. And the tarp. The tarp kept changing. Not every night, but regularly. Some mornings it would be freshly stained, heavy with new weight. Other mornings it would be lighter, partially emptied, like whatever was under it had been partially processed but not finished. There were times when the shape under the tarp was different, larger or smaller, arranged differently. Once I saw what I was almost certain was a shoe sticking out from under the edge. A trainer. White, with mud on it. I didn't look closer. I adjusted the tarp to cover it and went inside. I know what you're thinking. How could someone not look? How could you just walk away from that? And I don't have a good answer except to say that denial is not a choice you make once. It's a choice you make every minute of every day. You choose not to look, and then you choose not to think about not looking, and then you choose not to think about not thinking about it. And eventually there are so many layers of not thinking that the thing itself becomes almost abstract. It's there, but it's behind so many walls that it doesn't feel real. It feels like something happening to someone else, in some other version of the world. And in your version, you're just a butcher having a good quarter. I got very good at this. The customers loved it. That's the thing that keeps me up at night now. Not what I was doing in my sleep, but how much they loved it. They'd come in and their faces would light up. They'd talk about what they'd made with it. Roasts, stews, grilled cutlets, slow-cooked ragus. They'd share recipes with each other across the counter. Dieter from next door told me his mother-in-law, who'd been barely eating for months after her hip surgery, had 3 helpings of a stew his wife made with my meat and asked for more. He nearly cried telling me this. A young couple came in one Saturday and bought enough for a dinner party. They came back Monday and said it was the best meal they'd ever served, that their friends couldn't stop talking about it. That one friend, a guy who'd worked in restaurants for years, said he'd never tasted anything like it and wanted to know what breed it was and whether he could get it wholesale. I had no answers for any of them. I just smiled and said the supplier was very private and left it at that. There's something I haven't mentioned yet. About 2 months in, I started noticing news reports, local ones, small stories in the paper, and on the regional news sites, Missing persons, not a flood of them, one every couple of weeks maybe. A jogger who didn't come home from an evening run. An older man who went out to walk his dog and never returned. A woman whose car was found parked at a trailhead outside town, with her phone still in the cup holder. The police didn't seem to connect them. Different ages, different neighborhoods, different circumstances. No pattern that anyone could see. Just the background noise of people disappearing the way people sometimes do. Sadly, unremarkably, without enough drama to make the front page. I read these stories with my morning coffee before opening the shop. I read them carefully, slowly, and then I put the paper down and went downstairs and arranged the display case and unlocked the front door and smiled at Mrs. Brenner and asked her how her husband was doing. I want to say my hands shook. They didn't. I want to say I felt sick. I didn't. I want to tell you there was a moment of moral reckoning, some night where I sat alone in my flat and confronted what was happening and made a decision, one way or another. But that moment never came. What came instead was routine. The routine of opening the shop, of selling the meat, of counting the money, of going to bed, of waking up sore and tired, of finding new cuts in the cooler, of not looking in the van. The routine absorbed everything. It dissolved questions before they could fully form. That's how it works, I think. Evil doesn't need your permission or your participation. It just needs you to keep doing what you're already doing and not stop. 3 months in, I expanded the shop. Not a big renovation, just new display cases, a fresh coat of paint, a proper sign. I had the money for it now. The restaurant account was steady, the walk-in traffic had tripled, and I'd raised prices twice without losing a single customer. I bought new knives, professional grade, Japanese steel, the kind I'd always wanted but could never justify. I didn't need them really. The night work was done with my old knives, and the daytime work was just portioning and trimming what was already prepared. But I bought them anyway because I could. Lena asked me once where the special meat came from. She asked it casually, the way you ask any question about supply chain when you work in a food shop. Who's the supplier for the house special? Private farm, I said. Small operation. They don't deal with anyone else. She nodded. It's just funny, she said. The deliveries. I've never seen a delivery truck come. They come early, I said, before you get here. She accepted this, or at least she stopped asking about it. She was a smart girl, and I think she sensed that this was a question I didn't want poked at. She kept working, kept wrapping the cuts in paper, kept telling customers about the house special with genuine enthusiasm. I started having trouble with the van. Not mechanical trouble. It ran fine. But the smell. No matter how much I cleaned it, no matter how much disinfectant I used, there was a smell in the back that wouldn't go away. Sweet and thick and wrong. I bought air fresheners and hung them from the rearview mirror and put dryer sheets under the seats, and none of it mattered. The smell was in the metal now, soaked into the rubber floor mat, ground into the seams. I started parking the van further from the shop, down the alley, behind the dumpsters where nobody went. I told myself it was because the lot was getting busy with customer cars. That was partly true, but mostly it was because I didn't want to walk past it anymore. I didn't want to see it sitting there in the daylight, looking ordinary, looking like any other white panel van you'd see on the street. The tarp. I still hadn't looked under the tarp. Every morning I'd check the mileage, note the fuel, maybe glance at the back through the rear windows, and walk away. The shape under the tarp changed regularly. Sometimes the tarp was flat and empty, and I'd feel a rush of relief so intense it almost knocked me over. Because maybe it was done. Maybe whatever was driving my body at night had run its course, and I could go back to being a normal butcher, with normal meat, in a normal shop. But then the next morning the tarp would be heavy again, bunched around a new shape, and there would be fresh cuts in the cooler, and the bandsaw blade would be warm. There were mornings when I came downstairs, and the cutting area looked like a scene from something you'd see on the news. Not cleaned up yet, not organized, just the raw aftermath of whatever had happened in the hours I couldn't remember. Blood pooled in the grout lines between the floor tiles. Chunks of something I refused to examine closely in the waste bin. The saw caked with residue. And the smell, that same sweet, wrong smell from the van, filling the shop, hanging in the cold air like fog. I cleaned it up. Every time. I cleaned it up and opened the shop and smiled at my customers and handed them their wrapped packages and said, "Have a good day," and meant it, in a way, because their days were going to be good. They were going to go home and cook something delicious and sit down with their families and eat and be happy. And that was real. The happiness was real, even if what fed it was not. 5 months in, I was making more money than my father ever did, more than my grandfather. The shop account was healthy for the first time since I could remember. I paid off debts I'd been carrying for years. I bought new equipment. I started thinking about things I'd never allowed myself to think about before. Retirement, travel, a life outside the four walls of this shop. The missing persons reports continued, one every week or two. The police held a press conference at some point. I saw it on the evening news. They were asking the public for information. They said they weren't ruling out foul play. They showed photos of the missing, ordinary faces, the kind of people you pass on the street and never notice. A delivery driver, a retired school teacher, a university student, a nurse. I looked at their faces on my television screen and I felt nothing. That's the part that scares me, if anything still scares me. Not the sleepwalking, not the van, not the meat. The nothing. The vast, comfortable nothing where a feeling should have been. The next morning I found more cuts in the cooler. Beautiful as always. I put them in the display case. People ask me sometimes, regulars, people who've become almost friends through the ritual of buying meat every week, what makes the special cuts so good? And I give them the answer I always give. Heritage breed, small farm, careful husbandry. But sometimes I think about the real answer, about why this meat is different from anything else. It's because the animal lived a full life. That's the honest truth, or the closest thing to it. Whatever this meat comes from, it came from a body that walked and ran and sat and slept and moved through the world in 1,000 different ways. Not penned up, not fattened artificially, not fed a controlled diet and slaughtered at a predetermined age. This meat has the complexity of a life fully lived. Every bite carries the accumulated experience of muscles used for years, fat laid down in natural patterns, flavors developed through a diet of whatever that body chose to eat over the course of its existence. That's what you taste. That's what brings people back. The richness of a life. I think about that a lot. 6 months in, I started finding other things in the van besides the tarp. Small things. A watch, scratched and cheap, shoved into the gap between the wall and the floor. A set of keys on a ring with a little plastic charm. A cartoon cat, faded and cracked. A hair elastic, the thick kind with fabric over it, dark blue. These things were in the van the way loose change gets between couch cushions. Incidentally, carelessly, like they'd fallen off something or someone during transport and been left behind. I threw them away, one by one, into a public bin 3 streets from the shop. Not the dumpster behind the shop, a public bin, far enough away that they wouldn't be associated with me. I did this on autopilot, without thinking too hard about it. It was just maintenance, tidying up, the way you sweep the floor at the end of the day, or wipe down the display case. The watch bothered me the most for some reason. It was a cheap digital thing, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore. The band was small, a woman's watch or a teenager's. The screen was still working, blinking the time in pale green numbers. I held it in my hand for a minute before I dropped it in the bin. I felt the weight of it. I felt the warmth of the plastic against my palm. Then I went back to the shop and opened for business. I want to tell you this story has a climax, some moment of confrontation or collapse, a scene where everything comes apart, and I'm forced to reckon with what I've done, or what my body has done while I slept. But life doesn't work that way. There was no reckoning. There was no collapse. There was just the slow, relentless forward motion of days, each one the same as the last, each one carrying me further from whatever I used to be, and closer to whatever I've become. The shop is the best it's ever been. The customers are loyal and happy. The restaurant account keeps growing. Lena is talking about studying culinary arts, inspired, she says, by working here. Mrs. Brenner brings her grandchildren in now, and they press their faces against the display case and point at the cuts and say, "That one, Oma. Get that one." I still don't look under the tarp. I still don't watch the camera footage. I still wake up tired and sore and find bone dust in places it shouldn't be and wash it away and go downstairs and arrange the display case and unlock the front door. The missing persons reports have slowed down. Or maybe I've just stopped reading the paper. I'm not sure which. Yesterday, something small happened that I want to tell you about. It shouldn't matter, but it does, in a way I can't articulate properly. A man came into the shop around midday. I didn't recognize him. Not a regular. He was middle-aged, a little overweight, wearing a jacket that was too warm for the weather. He browsed the display case for a while, reading the labels, bending down to look at the cuts through the glass. Then he straightened up and pointed at the house special. "What is that?" he asked. "House special," I said. "Heritage breed, small farm, very popular." "What animal?" I paused. Nobody had asked me that directly before. They'd asked what breed, what farm, what region, but not what animal. I looked at this man, this stranger in my shop, and I saw something in his face that I recognized. Hunger. Not the physical kind. The other kind. The kind that makes you ask questions you don't really want answered. "It's a heritage breed," I said again. He looked at me for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then he shrugged and said, "I'll take 2 portions." I cut them, weighed them, wrapped them in brown paper. I handed them across the counter, and he paid, and I could feel him looking at me, studying my face, trying to read something in it. I gave him nothing. After 22 years behind a counter, your face becomes a mask. A pleasant, professional, empty mask. He left. I watched him through the window as he walked to his car, carrying the brown paper package, and I felt something shift inside me. Not guilt exactly. Something adjacent to guilt, but smaller, colder. The knowledge that this would never stop. That I would never make it stop. Because I didn't want to make it stop. Because the shop was doing well, and the customers were happy, and the money was good, and the meat was beautiful. Because this is who I am now. This morning I came downstairs, and there were 16 cuts on the tray, the most I've ever found. The bandsaw blade was warm, and there was a thin film of something on the floor near the drain that I mopped up quickly before Lena arrived. The van's mileage was up by 22 kilometers. The tarp was heavy. I arranged the display case. I unlocked the door. Mrs. Brenner was first in line, like always. She bought her usual order plus extra for her daughter's birthday dinner this weekend. Dieter came in for his wife's weekly order. The young couple from the dinner party months ago are now regulars. They come every Thursday. Around noon, a woman came in I hadn't seen before. She was maybe 30, dark hair, looking at her phone as she walked up to the counter. She glanced at the display case, and I saw her eyes widen slightly at the house special. That look. I know it now. The look of someone who's about to discover something they'll keep coming back for. "What do you recommend?" she asked. I reached into the case and pulled out one of the morning's cuts, held it up to the light for her, turning it so she could see the marbling, the fine grain of the muscle, the clean white fat laced through the pink. I told her about the heritage breed, the small farm, the careful process. I told her it was the best thing we sell, and that our customers can never get enough. She said she'd try a portion. I trimmed a sample, a thin slice, just a few grams, and cooked it right there in the back kitchen the way I'd cooked that first piece months ago. Salt, oil, high heat. The smell filled the shop, rich and deep and sweet. I brought it out on a small plate with a toothpick. She took the piece, put it in her mouth, and chewed slowly. I watched her face. I watched the way her eyes changed, the way her jaw slowed down as the flavor registered, really registered, in a way that made her stop thinking about her phone or her errands or whatever else was in her head. For a few seconds, she was entirely present, entirely absorbed in what she was tasting. She swallowed. She looked at me. "Oh my God," she said. "What is that?" I smiled the way I always smile. I wiped my hands on my apron. I leaned forward slightly across the counter, the way my father used to when he was proud of something he was selling, and I asked her the only question that mattered. "Good, right?" Nobody tells you what grief actually does to a house. They talk about the silence, the empty chair, the clothes still hanging in the closet, but nobody mentions how the house starts to feel like it's listening. Like the walls absorbed something when the person died, and now they're holding it, waiting to give it back. My wife Karen died in March. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to funeral. She was 51. After she was gone, I stayed in the house because I didn't know what else to do. 30 years we lived there, raised 2 kids there. It was a split level on Garfield Road in a town called Brevik, about 40 minutes north of the city if traffic cooperates. Nothing special about the house. Brown siding, small yard, a deck out back that I kept meaning to restain and never did. Karen used to give me grief about that deck. Said I'd been meaning to for 11 years. She was right. The first few weeks after the funeral were a blur. People brought food. My daughter Megan came and stayed for a while, but she has her own family, her own life in Portland, so eventually she went home. My son Derek called every couple of days. Friends checked in less and less. That's not a complaint. That's just what happens. People have their own problems. Grief has a shelf life in other people's minds, even if it doesn't have one in yours. By April, I was alone in the house most of the time, and I was not doing well. I wasn't eating right, wasn't sleeping right, wasn't really doing much of anything besides sitting in the living room watching television I didn't care about and waiting for the day to be over so I could go to bed and wait for the next day to be over. That kind of thing. I started hearing noises at night around the end of April. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I know how it sounds. Old guy, alone, grieving. Of course he starts hearing things. I thought the same thing. I told myself it was the house settling, pipes expanding, animals in the crawl space. I ran through every rational explanation because I am not a superstitious person. I don't go to church. Karen did sometimes, but I never saw the point. I believe in what I can see and touch and measure. Or I did. The noises were coming from the basement. We never used the basement much. It was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed joists, a water heater and furnace, and some storage shelves Karen had put up for holiday decorations and old photo albums. The stairs down were steep and narrow, the kind that make you hold the railing with both hands if you're over 40. There was a single bulb at the bottom with a pull chain. The sounds I heard were not house-settling sounds. They were rhythmic, a low, dull scraping, like something being dragged across the concrete floor in a slow, deliberate pattern. It would go on for 10, 20 seconds, then stop, then start again. Always at night, always from the basement, always when I was lying in bed trying to sleep. I went down there the first time with a flashlight, even though the bulb worked fine. I don't know why. The flashlight felt safer, like I could point it at whatever I found, and the beam would protect me somehow. Stupid. I searched the whole basement, looked behind the shelves, checked the window wells, looked for animal droppings or entry points. Nothing. The floor was bare concrete, cold and dusty. Everything was exactly where it had always been. I went back upstairs and the sound started again 20 minutes later. This went on for about 2 weeks. Every night the scraping. Every morning, nothing in the basement. I started sleeping with the television on in the bedroom because the noise from it covered the sounds from below. I told myself I was handling it. I told myself it was grief doing something to my brain, and that eventually my brain would sort itself out, and the sounds would stop. Then the scratching started on the walls. Not the basement walls, my bedroom walls. I'd be lying in bed and I'd hear it right next to my head, on the other side of the drywall. A slow, deliberate scratching, like a fingernail dragging down the wall from ceiling height to the floor. One long stroke, then silence, then another stroke. The first time it happened, I put my hand flat against the wall and I could feel it. The vibration. Something on the other side was touching the wall, and I was touching the wall, and there was about half an inch of drywall between us. I pulled my hand away so fast I knocked the lamp off the bedside table. I did not sleep in the bedroom after that. I moved to the couch in the living room and told myself it was because the couch was more comfortable, which was a lie. But lies are what keep you functional when the truth is something you can't deal with. The couch was fine for about 3 days. Then I started smelling something. It was faint at first, a sweetness that didn't belong, not like flowers or food, more like something chemical, like burnt sugar mixed with something rotten underneath. It came and went. Some nights it was barely there, just a trace when I breathed in deeply. Other nights it was thick enough to taste, coating the back of my throat, making me gag. I checked the fridge, the garbage, the drains. I checked for dead animals in the walls. I even called an exterminator, a guy named Dale who spent an hour in the house and found nothing. He told me old houses sometimes develop smells from mold or decaying insulation and charged me $150. The smell wasn't mold. I knew what mold smelled like. This was something else. I need to tell you about the previous owners of the house because it becomes important. When Karen and I bought the place in 1994, the sellers were a couple named Hargrove, Richard and Diane Hargrove. We never met them. Everything was handled through lawyers and the realtor. The house had been on the market for a while, almost a year, which is how we got it for under asking price. At the time, I figured it was just a slow market. The realtor said the Hargroves had relocated and were motivated to sell. That was good enough for me. Karen was pregnant with Megan, and we needed a house, and this one was in our budget and had a good school district. End of story. Except it wasn't. After the noises started, I did something I'd never had reason to do before. I looked up the Hargroves. I don't even know why. Some instinct, some nagging feeling that the house had a history I should know about. I expected to find nothing. Or maybe a forwarding address. Something mundane. What I found was a newspaper article from 1991, 3 years before we bought the house. The article was from the local paper's archive, digitized and put online at some point. It was about Richard Hargrove being arrested. The charges were not what I expected. I thought maybe domestic violence, maybe fraud, maybe a DUI. The charges were for criminal conspiracy and something the article called ritualistic abuse. There was a second article from a few months later about the charges being dropped due to insufficient evidence. And then a third article, shorter, about Diane Hargrove filing for divorce. I sat at my kitchen table reading these articles on my laptop, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Ritualistic abuse. The article was vague about details. It was from a small-town paper in the early 90s, and the writing was careful, almost evasive. But it mentioned that the investigation had been prompted by a neighbor's complaint about unusual activity at the Hargrove residence, and that police had found items of concern in the home during a search. The home. My home. I kept searching. There wasn't much else online. This was a small-town story from 35 years ago, and the internet doesn't hold everything. But I found a forum post from 2008. One of of those local history threads where people share stories about their town. Someone with the username Brevikborn62 had written a paragraph about the Hargrove case. They said Richard Hargrove had been part of a group. They didn't call it a cult. They called it a circle that met in private homes in the area. The group practiced what the poster called invocational rites. The poster said the police had found a space in the Hargrove basement that had been modified for these purposes. Symbols on the floor, candles, animal remains. The poster said the charges were dropped, not because Hargrove was innocent, but because 2 witnesses recanted, and the physical evidence was compromised during the investigation. The basement. They found it in the basement. I went downstairs again that night. Not with the flashlight this time. I turned on every light I could. The basement looked the same as it always had. Concrete floor, shelves, furnace, water heater. I got down on my hands and knees and looked at the floor. Really looked at it. The concrete was old, poured sometime in the 60s or 70s based on the house's age. It had the usual cracks and discolorations. But in one area, near the back wall where the shelves were, the color of the concrete was different. Slightly darker, slightly smoother, like it had been resurfaced at some point. A patch, roughly 6 feet by 6 feet. I moved the shelves. They were heavy. Karen's holiday stuff, boxes of old books, a set of encyclopedias we'd never thrown out. Took me almost an hour. When the shelves were cleared, I could see the patch clearly. It was definitely a repair. Someone had poured new concrete over this section of the floor, probably decades ago. But the color difference was unmistakable once you knew where to look. I stood there staring at that patch of floor, and I heard the scraping sound. Not from below me, not from the walls, from the patch itself, right beneath my feet. A slow, grinding drag, like something heavy being pulled across stone in a space that shouldn't exist. I left the basement. I closed the door at the top of the stairs. I sat on the couch and turned the television up loud, and I did not go back down there for 3 days. During those 3 days, things got worse. The smell became constant, not just at night, all day, every room, a cloying sweetness that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I opened every window in the house and it didn't help. I bought scented candles, air purifiers, an ozone machine I found online that claimed to eliminate any odor. None of it worked. The smell was winning. The scratching moved. Not just the bedroom wall anymore. I heard it in the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Always behind the walls. Always that same slow, deliberate stroke from top to bottom. Sometimes I'd be standing right next to it, inches from the wall, and I could hear it so clearly that I was certain if I punched through the drywall, I'd find a hand on the other side. And then the whispers started. I don't want to talk about the whispers, but I have to because they're the reason for everything that happened after. They were quiet. So quiet that for the first couple of nights I genuinely thought I was imagining them. That grief and insomnia, and the stress of living in a house that was doing whatever this house was doing, had finally cracked something in my head. But they weren't imagined. They were real. And they were coming from the basement. And they were saying my name. Not my full name. Not Paul. Something else. Something that sounded like my name but wasn't. A version of it with extra syllables, spoken in a voice that had too many layers. Like several people whispering the same word at slightly different speeds. the sounds overlapping and blurring together into something that wasn't quite language but wasn't quite noise either. I called my daughter. I didn't tell her about the sounds or the smell. I just asked her if she thought I should sell the house. She said she thought that was a good idea. She said the house was too big for one person and full of memories that might be keeping me stuck. She used the word stuck very carefully, the way you do when you mean something worse, but don't want to say it. I called a realtor the next day. A woman named Janet, friendly, professional, came to the house to do a walkthrough and give me a pricing estimate. She walked through every room, took photos, made notes. When she got to the basement, she went about halfway down the stairs and stopped. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she said, "Is there a drainage issue down here? I'm getting a smell." "Old pipes," I said. She nodded and came back up, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked about listing price and timeline. She said the market was good. She could probably have it listed within a month. She left, and I felt better for about 2 hours. Then the sun went down, and the smell came back, and the whispering came back, and I did not feel better anymore. The realtor thing fell apart. I won't go into all the details because they don't matter, but the short version is that I couldn't bring myself to do it. Every time I started the paperwork, something stopped me. Not a feeling, an actual physical inability to continue. My hand would cramp, my vision would blur. Once I was sitting at the kitchen table signing a disclosure form and I blacked out. Not fell asleep, blacked out. Lost about 40 minutes. When I came to, the form was torn in half and I was standing in front of the basement door with my hand on the knob. That scared me more than anything else so far. Not the noises, not the smell, not the whispers. The fact that my body had done something without my permission. That I had been moved like a piece on a board. I started looking into the history of the house more seriously after that. Not just the Hargroves, everything. I went to the county records office and pulled the property history. The house was built in 1967 by a family called Olson, who lived there until 1978. After them, a couple named Freed owned it for 3 years. Then the Hargroves bought it in 1982 and lived there until 1993, when they put it on the market. Then Karen and me, from 1994 onward. The Freeds were interesting. They only lived there 3 years. I found their names in a few records, but nothing unusual. No arrests, no newspaper articles. But then I found an obituary. Gerald Freed. Died 1981, at the age of 34. Cause of death was listed as suicide. He'd hanged himself. The obituary didn't say where, but the date matched the year the Freeds sold the house. And the Olsons, the original builders. I couldn't find much about them except that Mrs. Olson, first name Ruth, had been admitted to a psychiatric facility in 1977. The record was sparse, just a court filing for involuntary commitment. The stated reason was that she had become a danger to herself and others, and had been found by police in a state of extreme distress inside the home. 3 families before me. A psychiatric commitment, a suicide, a ritualistic abuse investigation, and now me, standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m, listening to my name being whispered from the basement of a house that didn't want to let me leave. I should have left anyway. I know that. I should have packed a bag and driven to a motel and never come back. But I didn't, and the reason is complicated and embarrassing and has to do with Karen. See, the whispers changed around the second week. They were still coming from the basement, still that layered half-language sound. But now, sometimes, mixed in with the other voices, I could hear hers, Karen's voice. Not clearly, not like a recording or a memory, just the shape of it, the cadence, the way she pronounced certain sounds. It was there, underneath the other voices, and it was calling me downstairs. I knew it wasn't really her. I knew that. I am not a stupid man, and I understand how grief works. And I understand that your mind will find what it's looking for, even in random noise. I knew all of that. And I still stood at the top of the basement stairs every night and listened, because even a false version of her voice was better than the silence she left behind. That's how it gets you. Not through fear, through want. One night in late May, I went down the stairs. I didn't decide to. My feet just started moving and I let them. The bulb at the bottom was out. I'd replaced it a week ago, but it was dead again. I didn't go back for a flashlight. I walked down the stairs in the dark, holding the railing, one step at a time, and the air got colder with each step, and the smell got thicker, and the whispering got louder. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped. The basement was completely dark. I couldn't see the walls, the shelves, the floor. Nothing. Just black. But I could feel something. A presence is the only word I have for it. And I hate that word because it sounds like something from a bad movie. But it's the truth. There was something in the basement with me. And it was large. And it was aware of me. And it was glad I'd come down. The whispering stopped. Everything went quiet in a way that felt like pressure, like the silence had weight, like it was pressing against my eardrums. I stood there in the dark for what felt like a very long time. My heart was going fast, and my breath was shallow, and every part of me wanted to turn around and go back up the stairs. Then I heard Karen's voice, clear this time. Not buried under other sounds, not distorted or layered, just her voice, the way it sounded when she'd call me from another room, casual and warm. She said, "Come here, Paul." And I walked toward it. I walked forward in the dark with my hands out in front of me, and I crossed the basement floor to where the patch was. The repaired concrete near the back wall. I knew where I was even in the dark because I could feel the change underfoot, the slightly smoother surface. I stopped there and I looked down, even though I couldn't see anything. Karen's voice came again, but this time it came from below, from under the floor, and it said something that wasn't in English. I don't mean it was in another language I recognized. It was in no language. Sounds that had the structure of speech but the content of nothing I'd ever heard. Low, guttural, with clicks and pauses in places that made my jaw ache just listening. I dropped to my knees. I put my hands flat on the concrete. It was warm. Not slightly warm. Hot. Like the floor had been heated from underneath, and it was vibrating. A deep, low hum I could feel in my bones, in my teeth, in the base of my skull. Something touched my hand. From below, through the concrete. I know that's not possible. Concrete is solid. It's dense. Nothing can reach through it. But something did. I felt fingers close around mine. Not grab, not grip, just close gently, the way Karen used to hold my hand when we were watching television. A warm, gentle pressure, and I held on. I held on because it felt like her, and I missed her so much that I would have held the hand of anything that offered. I don't know how long I knelt there, When I finally got up and went back upstairs, the sun was coming up. My knees were bruised from the concrete. My hands were dirty, and there were marks on my palms. Not cuts, not bruises. Symbols. Small, reddish, like henna tattoos but embedded in the skin. Circles and lines in a pattern I didn't recognize. I washed my hands. The marks didn't come off. I scrubbed with soap, with rubbing alcohol, with a Brillo pad until my palms were raw and bleeding. The marks stayed. They were under the skin, part of it somehow, like they'd been branded from beneath. I wore gloves for a week. Long sleeves, work gloves. Told the cashier at the grocery store I'd been doing yard work. The marks faded gradually. Not like they were healing, but like they were sinking deeper, going somewhere inside me where they couldn't be seen. After that night, the house changed. Or I changed. Hard to tell the difference. The whispering stopped. Not because it went away, but because I started to understand it. Not the words exactly, but the meaning behind them. Like learning a language through immersion, where one day you realize you've been following a conversation without translating it in your head. The voices in the basement were saying things, and I was receiving those things, and they were settling into my mind like sediment. I started dreaming. Not normal dreams, structured ones, with a consistency that dreams don't usually have. Every night the same place, a room with no walls, just darkness in every direction, and a floor made of the same warm concrete from my basement. And in the center of this room, a shape. I can't describe it accurately because it didn't behave like a physical object. It shifted. It had angles that hurt to look at, and surfaces that seemed to recede and advance at the same time. Looking at it made my nose bleed in the dream, and when I woke up, there was blood on my pillow. In the dream, the shape spoke to me. It spoke in that not language, and I understood it. It told me what it wanted, what it had always wanted, from the Olsons, from the Freeds, from Richard Hargrove. It had been asking for decades, through the floor, through the walls, through whatever channel connected its space to ours. Most people couldn't hear it. Ruth Olson heard it, and it broke her mind. Gerald Freed heard it, and chose to die rather than listen. Richard Hargrove heard it, and tried to give it what it asked for. But he did it wrong. The rituals, the symbols, the group he assembled, all of it was cargo cult nonsense, a misinterpretation of something that had no human framework. What it wanted was simple. It wanted to be let in, not metaphorically, physically. It existed somewhere adjacent to our space, not below the house exactly, but accessible through the house, through that specific patch of floor that someone had poured concrete over decades ago to seal something that couldn't be sealed with concrete. It wanted a body. It needed a person to agree. Not under duress, not through trickery. A genuine, voluntary yes. That was the rule, apparently. There were rules. Even for this, there were rules. And it had been so patient. Karen's voice was the bait. I understood that now. Not Karen. Something wearing the pattern of Karen's voice the way you'd wear a mask. It had listened to 30 years of our life together, absorbed every conversation, every argument, every murmured goodnight, and it had learned her well enough to reproduce her. Not perfectly, close enough to fool a grieving man in a dark basement, which didn't require perfection. I understood all of this, and I still went back down. Every night I went down to the basement. I knelt on the patch, I put my hands on the warm concrete, and the thing below spoke to me, and I listened. The marks appeared on my body, not just my hands, my forearms, my chest, my back. Symbols I'd never seen in any book, any website, any religion. They'd surface like bruises, stay for a few days, then sink back under the skin. I stopped looking in mirrors because my face was starting to show them too. Faint lines around my eyes, along my jaw, at my temples, like very old tattoos almost fully faded. I stopped answering my phone. Megan called and I let it ring. Derek sent texts I didn't read. A neighbor knocked on the door one afternoon and I stood on the other side and didn't move until they left. The house was mine now, or I was the house's. The distinction didn't seem important. My thoughts were changing, not dramatically. I wasn't hearing commands or losing time in a way I could measure. It was subtler. I'd be eating breakfast and I'd think about something I'd never thought about before. The mechanics of what holds a person together. How little force it actually takes to separate bone from bone. The sounds a body makes when it's being pulled apart. These thoughts arrived fully formed, like memories of things I'd never done. Detailed and vivid and completely calm. I didn't feel disturbed by them. I felt educated, like I was being taught something essential that everyone else had chosen to ignore. I started sleeping in the basement, brought down a blanket and a pillow, and lay on the concrete patch and closed my eyes. And the hum came through the floor and into my spine, and I slept better than I'd slept since Karen died. The dreams were more intense down there. The shape was clearer, closer, and I could almost see a face in it. Not a human face. Something that had the concept of a face without the commitment to a specific arrangement of features. It would almost resolve into something recognizable, and then shift. And the shifting itself felt like it was telling me something about the nature of the thing. That it was old. That it had been old when the ground this house was built on was open land. That it had been old before there were people to build on it. Here is where I need to tell you what happened to the neighbor. His name was Ed Murrow. No relation to the famous one. He'd say that every time he introduced himself. Thought it was hilarious. He lived in the house to the left of mine with his wife Barbara. He was retired, early 70s, the kind of neighbor who's always outside doing something in his yard. Mowing, raking, fixing the gutter, standing at the property line making conversation whether you wanted it or not. Good guy. Annoying in the way that good guys sometimes are. Ed came over one evening in June. I'd been in the basement for most of the day and hadn't realized it was evening until I heard the doorbell. I came up and there was Ed on the porch, and the look on his face when I opened the door told me that something about my appearance was wrong. He didn't say it directly. He said, "Jesus, Paul, are you feeling all right?" And I said I was fine. And he said, "You don't look fine, buddy. You look like you haven't slept in a month." I told him I was having trouble adjusting. He nodded like he understood. He said he and Barbara had been worried about me, that they'd noticed the lights on at all hours, and that they hadn't seen me outside in weeks. He asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. Barbara was making pot roast. I said no. He stood there for a second, and then he said, "What's that smell in there? Did something die in your walls?" I closed the door in his face. Not slammed, just closed. I heard him stand on the porch for a while, then walk away. That night, in the basement, I understood what the shape wanted me to do. It had been asking in the dreams, asking in the not language, asking through the symbols on my skin. I'd been receiving the message for weeks without letting myself decode it. But that night, kneeling on the warm concrete with my palms flat and my eyes closed, I decoded it. It needed a body, not mine. It had me already, in a way. A useful conduit, a cooperative host. What it needed was raw material, a physical form it could inhabit fully, permanently, in our space. And building that form required what every building project requires: materials. I won't describe everything I did to Ed Murrow. I owe him that much. I'll say that it was a Wednesday night, and I went to his house through the back, through the gap in the fence between our yards, and I found him in his garage working on something at his workbench. Barbara was inside watching television. I could see the light from the living room flickering through the kitchen window. I will say that what happened was fast, and that Ed didn't understand what was happening. I will say that the thing inside me, or behind me, or beneath me, I still don't know the right preposition, knew exactly what to do, and my hands did it, and the sounds Ed made were brief. I will say that I carried him back through the gap in the fence and down my basement stairs, and I put him on the patch, and I left him there. In the morning, there was nothing on the patch. No body, no blood, no evidence. The concrete was clean and warm, but the hum was louder. I could feel it through the entire house now, a vibration in the floor, in the walls, in the air itself. And the patch had changed. It was darker, warmer, pulsing almost, with a rhythm that felt biological. Barbara called the police the next day. Ed was missing. They came to my door and asked if I'd seen him. I said I hadn't, not since he'd come by for a visit a couple of days ago. They thanked me and left. A search was organized. His picture was on the news. Barbara went on camera and cried and begged anyone with information to come forward. I watched this on my television from my couch and felt nothing at all. The shape needed more. I understood this the way you understand hunger. Not as a thought, but as a state. The patch in the basement was active now, warm all the time, humming constantly, the surface slightly soft when I pressed on it, like the concrete was becoming something else. But it wasn't enough. One was not enough. The shape had shown me, in the dreams, what it would look like when it was finished. The body it would build for itself, from what I brought it. The body required more material. There was a woman who walked her dog past my house every evening. I'd seen her for years. Medium height, red jacket, some kind of retriever. I didn't know her name. I didn't need to know her name. I did what I did on a Friday evening when it was getting dark. I won't describe this either. The dog ran away. I never saw it again. The patch grew darker, warmer. The hum became a sound I could hear with my ears, not just feel in my body. The symbols on my skin were permanent now. They didn't fade anymore. I stopped wearing shirts in the house because the fabric irritated them. They covered my arms, my torso, my back, dense and layered, and in certain light they seemed to move, rearranging themselves slowly, like a text being rewritten. A man from the gas company came to read the meter. I didn't plan it. He was just there, at the side of my house, alone, in the middle of a weekday when no one was watching. The thing inside me saw an opportunity, and my body acted before my mind could form an objection. If my mind would have objected, I'm not sure anymore. 3 people. The patch was almost ready. I could see it changing when I went down to the basement now. The surface wasn't concrete anymore. It was dark, organic looking, wet, pulsing with that biological rhythm. It was warm to the touch, and it yielded when I pressed on it, like skin stretched over something large that was pushing upward. The hum had become a heartbeat, slow, deep, shaking the joists above my head. The dreams had stopped because I no longer needed them. The shape communicated with me directly now, during waking hours, a presence in my mind that was separate from my own thoughts, but entangled with them. It showed me what was coming. When it had enough material, when the body was complete, it would push through the floor. It would stand up. It would walk out of my basement and into the world, and it would be real and solid and permanent, and it would do what it had been waiting to do for longer than there had been a house here, longer than there had been a town here, longer than there had been anything here but dirt and rock and the patient dark beneath. It needed one more. I knew who. I'd known for a while, the way you know the next step of a recipe without looking at the book. The shape had chosen carefully, and the choice made a terrible kind of sense. Megan called one morning in late June and said she was coming to visit. She was worried about me, she said. She'd been calling for weeks and I hadn't picked up. She'd talked to Derek, and they'd agreed someone needed to check on me in person. She said she'd be there in 2 days. I hung up the phone and went to the basement and knelt on the patch, on the thing the patch had become, and I pressed my hands into its warm, wet surface, and I told the shape no. Not out loud. In the space where it lived in my mind, I said no. Not her. Anyone else. Not my daughter. The shape didn't argue. It didn't threaten. It just showed me what would happen if I refused. Not to me, to Megan. It showed me Megan driving to Brevik, pulling into my driveway, walking up to the front door. It showed her stepping inside. It showed the house taking her the way the house had tried to take Ruth Olson, the way it had taken Gerald Freed. Not through me, directly. The walls, the floor, the air itself. The house was saturated with the shape's presence now, and anyone who entered was inside it. I was protected because I'd cooperated. Megan would not be protected. The choice was not between doing it and not doing it. The choice was between doing it quickly, through me, or letting the house do it slowly, on its own. The shape was very clear about this. It had been clear about everything, once I learned how to listen. Megan arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I watched her park her rental car in the driveway from the living room window. She got out and looked at the house, and I saw her face change. She could tell something was wrong. The house looked different now, even from outside. The brown siding had darkened, not from dirt or weather, but from within, like the wood was bruising. The windows had a film on them, a faint iridescence, like oil on water. The deck I never restained, was sagging in the middle, warped by whatever was happening underneath. She walked up to the door. I opened it before she knocked. She looked at me and her mouth opened slightly, and she didn't say anything for a few seconds. I knew what she was seeing. The symbols on my skin were visible above my collar, along my neck, climbing my jaw. I'd lost weight. My eyes, I'm told, had changed. The irises darker than they used to be, the pupils slow to react. "Dad," she said, "what happened to you?" I told her to come inside. I told her we needed to talk. I told her everything was fine. I'd just been under the weather. I was glad she was here. I said all the right things in the right voice, and she came inside because I was her father and she trusted me. The door closed behind her. I did not close it. I heard the lock turn on its own. I heard the deadbolt slide. Megan heard it too. She turned and looked at the door, and then looked back at me, and I watched something shift in her expression. The beginning of understanding. The first crack in the assumption that this was just her dad in a dirty house being weird after Mom died. She could smell it now, the sweetness, and she could hear the hum, and the walls were doing something they didn't do when I was alone. They were breathing, expanding and contracting, barely visible, like the house was a living thing, and she was inside it. "Dad," she said again, and this time her voice had fear in it. I stood between her and the basement door. Behind me I could feel the warmth rising from below, the heartbeat of the thing that had been waiting for this moment for decades, maybe centuries, maybe longer. The symbols on my skin were burning. The shape was in my mind, pressing, eager, telling me that this was it. This was the last one. This was the completion. I looked at my daughter. I looked at her face, which was Karen's face with my jaw, and Karen's eyes and my stubborn forehead. And I tried to find something inside me that was still the man who walked her to school and taught her to ride a bike and sat next to Karen in the hospital room when she was born. I found it. Small, faint, buried under months of whatever the shape had been building in me. But there. I told Megan to run. I told her to go to the door and run and not come back. I told her to sell the house from Portland through a lawyer and to never set foot in it again. I screamed at her to go. The house fought. The lock held. The deadbolt didn't slide. The door was sealed, fused, the wood swelling in the frame like a body rejecting a splint. Megan was pulling at it, crying, hitting it with her palms. The hum was deafening now, the walls contracting, the floor buckling upward like something was pushing from below. Plaster cracked, the lights burst. In the darkness, I could see the symbols on my skin glowing, a faint, reddish luminescence like embers. I put myself between the basement door and Megan. The shape roared through my mind, not in words, in pure force, a blast of rage and hunger and centuries of waiting. It took hold of my arms, my legs, tried to walk me toward her. I fought it. I fought it with every scrap of self I had left, which wasn't much, and it wasn't enough. I was losing. I could feel my body turning toward her, and my hands reaching, and my mouth opening to say something in that not language that would finish the ritual. Megan broke the window. The living room window, the big one. She put a chair through it, and the glass exploded outward, and the night air rushed in, and the house screamed. Not a sound, a feeling. A frequency that shattered what was left of the plaster and split the floor and knocked me to my knees. She climbed through the window. I saw her silhouette against the streetlight outside, half through, glass tearing her jacket, and then she was gone, running. I heard her footsteps on the sidewalk, fast, panicked, fading. The house went quiet. The hum stopped. The warmth from the basement went cold, all at once, like a furnace being switched off. I lay on the floor in the dark, in the broken glass and plaster dust, and I breathed. Then I felt the shape's response. Not rage, not frustration. Something worse. Patience. Because Megan was gone, but I was still here, and the house was still here, and the patch in the basement was still warm enough, still active enough, still waiting. The shape had been doing this for a very long time, and it understood setbacks the way a glacier understands obstacles. It goes around. It goes through. It just takes a little longer. I'm writing this from the living room couch. It's been 4 days since Megan left. She's called the police, I think. Someone came to the door yesterday, but I didn't answer and they left. She's probably called Derek too. They're probably talking about what to do with Dad. Intervention, commitment, something clinical that makes sense in their world. The window is boarded up. I don't remember doing it. The basement door is open. I didn't open it. The hum is back, softer now, gentle almost, the way Karen used to hum when she was cooking. Not Karen. I need to remember that. Not Karen. The marks on my skin are spreading again. They're on my face now, around my eyes, and when I look at my hands, I can see them rearranging themselves into something new, a pattern I'm starting to recognize from the dreams. It's a name, I think. The shape's name, written on me like a label, like a return address. I can hear the whispering from the basement. It sounds like Karen again. It sounds so much like her. It's saying, "Come down, Paul." It's saying we're almost there. It's saying it doesn't have to be Megan. It can be anyone. There are other people on this street, other houses, other neighborhoods full of people who won't be missed right away. And the worst part, the part that I need to write down before I lose the ability to understand why it's the worst part, is that I'm thinking about it. I'm running through names in my head, faces, people I see at the grocery store, at the gas station, walking past my house. The shape is helping me think about it, sorting through options, weighing logistics, and it feels like planning a trip or organizing a project. Just a task with steps. I'm going to go downstairs now. Not because I want to, because the floor is warm and the hum is gentle and the voice sounds like Karen and I am so tired and so alone. And the thing in the basement is the only thing in the world that wants me to come closer. I don't think I'm coming back up. I hope nobody comes to the house. I hope nobody comes to help me or investigate or try to make sense of what happened here. There is nothing here that can be helped, and nothing here that investigation will solve. The house will still be here after I'm gone, and the patch will still be warm, and the whispering will still be waiting for the next person who is lonely enough and broken enough to listen. Sell it. Burn it. Pour concrete over the whole lot and build something else on top and pray that whatever is underneath stays underneath. But it won't. It's patient. It has always been patient. And sooner or later someone will move in and they'll hear the sounds in the basement and they'll tell themselves it's just the house settling, just pipes, just animals in the walls. And then they'll hear a voice they recognize, and they'll go downstairs.